You heard that right, $3 trillion. To put that magnitude into perspective, that is not a market correction. That is enough capital to buy Apple, Microsoft, and Google simultaneously. It is larger than the entire economy of the United Kingdom, and it evaporated from the US financial system overnight. But you didn't see a crash on the ticker. They didn't execute this on public exchanges. They moved this massive capital through dark pools, through a labyrinth of shell companies and sovereign wealth proxies. This was coordinated silence, engineered for one specific purpose: to ensure that you, the average citizen, stayed in the dark until the trap had already snapped shut. So let me ask yourself, why is the TV still silent? Why is Wall Street projecting such an eerie calm? The ugly truth is that this is a controlled demolition. The elites are using this artificial silence to exit their positions. They are quietly swapping their dying paper dollars for gold and hard assets right under your nose, while telling you everything is fine if you are currently holding cash, treasury bonds, or US stocks. You are standing at ground zero of a financial nuclear detonation without a hazmat suit. Lock your door. Pay attention. What I am about to reveal in the next 20 minutes isn't news. It is your final life raft. To understand how a superpower liquidates $3 trillion without triggering an immediate market collapse, you have to stop thinking like a retail investor and start thinking like a state-level operative. If you or I sold a large block of stock, the price would dip. If China dumped their entire holding of US Treasuries on the open market at 9:30 a.m. on a Monday, the bond market would flatline instantly. Interest rates would spike to double digits before lunch, and the global economy would seize up. That is a suicide vest, not a strategy. So they didn't do that. Instead, they executed a phantom exit. The mechanism they used is known in high-level finance as custodial obfuscation. China didn't just sell bonds directly from the People's Bank of China accounts. They utilized a shadow network of intermediaries, primarily operating through offshore clearinghouses. Look at the data from the Treasury International Capital reports. On paper, China's direct holdings seem to be declining at a steady, manageable rate. But look closer at the valuation adjustments and the anomalous spikes in custodial accounts in jurisdictions like Belgium, home to Euroclear, and Luxembourg. These are the back channels. These are the holding pins where sovereign wealth funds wash the origin of their sales. They transfer the ownership to shell companies and sovereign proxies, who then sell into the liquidity provided by Western central banks. By the time the bond actually hits the market, its Chinese fingerprint has been wiped clean. This wasn't a panic sale. It was a surgical extraction of capital, executed with military precision, and it with military precision to bleed the system dry without alerting the host until the parasite was already gone. But why now? And why this specific amount? This brings us to the motive. You cannot view this as mere portfolio rebalancing or economic housekeeping. This is an act of war. The trigger wasn't inflation or interest rates. The trigger was a realization that occurred in February 2022, when the United States weaponized the dollar system to freeze $300 billion of Russia's foreign reserves. A chill went down the spine of every nation in the global south. Washington proved that the dollar is no longer a neutral store of value. For decades, buying U.S. Treasuries was considered risk-free, but when the issuer of that debt can arbitrarily decide that your money no longer belongs to you because they disagree with your foreign policy, that debt becomes return-free risk. China looked at their $3 trillion stockpile and realized it wasn't a savings account, it was a hostage situation. They are now breaking those chains. They are systematically exiting the dollar system not because they need the cash, but because they know the system itself has been weaponized against them. We need to address the sheer magnitude of this exit to understand the danger you are in. We are talking about $3 trillion. Again, to remind you, that is a sum larger than the entire GDP of the United Kingdom. It is more capital than the output of India. In the ecosystem of global finance, China is the whale. They have been the buyer of last resort for American debt for a generation. They provided the cheap liquidity that kept your mortgage rates low and your government spending high. When the biggest whale in the ocean decides to leave the pool, the water level doesn't just lower, it disappears. The liquidity that greased the gears of the American economy is evaporating. And when the buyer of last resort walks away, who is left to buy the debt that funds your way of life? The answer is no one. And that vacuum creates a specific, terrifying vulnerability that has been rotting the foundation of the American empire for 50 years. Do not let the complexity of their exit distract you from the brutality of the consequence. Check the links in the description for the raw tick data if you doubt the scale of this exodus. And to understand why this specific $3 trillion withdrawal is the death blow, we have to go back to 1971 and the secret deal that turned a piece of green paper into the most powerful weapon on Earth. To understand why the Chinese exit is fatal, we must first understand what they are exiting from. We have to peel back the layers of the American economic miracle to reveal the rotting machinery underneath. The story of your money does not begin with your paycheck. It begins on August 15, 1971, when President Nixon appeared on television to temporarily suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. He effectively turned the US dollar into a fiat currency backed by nothing but faith. By all laws of economics, the dollar should have collapsed then and there. It didn't. Why? Because Washington executed the greatest geopolitical maneuver in history. Shortly after the gold window closed, the US struck a secret deal with the House of Saud. The terms were simple and absolute. The United States would provide unwavering military protection and hardware to the Saudi kingdom. In exchange, the Saudis would price every single barrel of oil they sold exclusively in US dollars. This created the petrodollar system. Suddenly, it didn't matter if you were Japan, Germany, or Brazil. If you wanted to power your factories, drive your cars, or heat your homes, you needed oil. And to buy oil, you were forced to acquire US dollars first. This engineered a permanent, artificial demand for the dollar. Every nation on Earth was forced to hoard greenbacks just to participate in global trade. This gave the United States a superpower that no other empire in history has ever possessed: the ability to print its own bills while the rest of the world had to worm to earn them. We could print paper. They had to send us real cars, real electronics, and real resources. It was, as the French finance minister of the time called it, an exorbitant privilege. But privilege creates complacency, and complacency breeds corruption. For 50 years, the world trusted America to be the responsible custodian of this global reserve currency. That privilege required trust. It required the world to believe that the dollar would hold its value and that the system was fair. Instead, we abused it. Over the last 2 decades, that trust has been systematically incinerated. We turned on the printing press to fund endless wars in the Middle East that we couldn't afford. We printed trillions to bail out irresponsible banks in 2008. We printed trillions more for stimulus packages. With every new trillion printed, we diluted the savings of every foreign nation holding our debt. We effectively stole purchasing power from our creditors to fund our own lifestyle. But the final nail in the coffin wasn't just the printing, it was the weaponization. We proved that the dollar is not a neutral utility. It is a tool of American foreign policy. By using the dollar system to sanction countries we don't like, by freezing assets and cutting nations off from international trade, we violated the core tenet of a reserve currency. Money is trust. When you weaponize the money, you kill the trust. China watched this. The Global South watched this. They realized that holding dollars was no longer a safe haven. It was a vulnerability. And now the foundation is crumbling. The pillar that held this entire house of cards together, the Saudi deal, has snapped. In 1974, Saudi Arabia sold oil exclusively in dollars. In 2023, Saudi Arabia announced to the world that they are now open to selling oil in other currencies. Do not estimate this statement. That is not a policy tweak. That is the foundational pillar of the petrodollar system cracking in real time. The monopoly is over. The artificial demand is gone. And without that demand, all those trillions of dollars floating overseas have nowhere to go but home invented before that flood hits our shores. Something else is rising to take its place. Something that has been hidden in plain sight for a decade. If you think the petrodollar is still alive, try to find a recent official reanimation of the 1974 deal. You won't, because it doesn't exist. The dollar is dying because it is backed by nothing but debt. Now let's look at the system China is building to replace it, one backed by the only asset that cannot be printed. Nature abhors a vacuum, and as the American petrodollar recedes, a new architecture is rising to fill the void. This isn't just a competitor, it is a replacement. While Washington has been distracted by political theater, Beijing has been engaged in the greatest act of monetary subterfuge in modern history. The real weapon in China's arsenal is not a hypersonic missile, it is gold. But you have to dig past the headlines to see it. If you look at the official reports from the People's Bank of China, they claim to hold around 2,000 tons of gold. That is a modest number, barely enough to register as a threat. That number is a lie. Independent analysts tracking import data through Hong Kong and Switzerland estimate the real figure is between 20,000 and 30,000 tons. That is more than the United States officially holds. Why lie? Because you don't announce you are cornering the market while you are still buying. You accumulate quietly. You suppress the price in the West so you can buy more in the East. The center of gravity has already shifted. The Shanghai Gold Exchange, where China trades its metal, now handles more physical gold volume than London or New York. This matters because he who holds the gold makes the rules. When you control the physical gold market, you control the ultimate benchmark for what money is actually worth. They are building the infrastructure to price the world's wealth, not in dollars, but in grams of metal. But gold is just the foundation. The walls of this new fortress are being built by an alliance that the West dismissed as a mere acronym. BRICS. For years, Wall Street laughed at the BRICS nations. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. They called them emerging markets. And in August 2023, the alliance mutated into something far more dangerous to the dollar. They invited Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iran, Egypt, and Ethiopia to join. Look at that list again. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iran, Russia. These aren't just countries. These are the world's gas station. By bringing the world's largest energy producers into the fold, BRICS has effectively captured the energy market. Saudi Arabia, the very country that made the petrodollar system possible, is now joining an alliance explicitly designed to dismantle it. This brings us to the end game, the unit. In June 2024, the BRICS nations announced they are developing a new currency backed by a basket of commodities, including gold. Imagine this scenario. On one side of the table, you have the US dollar, backed by $35 trillion in debt, political dysfunction, and the promise of future taxation. On the other side, you have a new trade settlement unit backed by oil, gold, rare earth metals, and manufacturing capacity. A currency backed by stuff will always destroy a currency backed by promises. China isn't just selling $3 trillion in US assets to get out of cash. They are selling the past to buy the future. They are literally building an alternative to the dollar from scratch, and they are inviting every country in the world to join them. When the option to trade in a gold-backed currency becomes available, central banks holding worthless paper dollars are going to face a panic-inducing choice. And when they choose the exit, the flood of unwanted dollars won't just vanish, it will come home. Do not mistake this for a distant geopolitical problem. This is a direct attack on the purchasing power in your savings account, because when those trillions of dollars are rejected by the world, they have only one place left to go, right back into the US domestic economy, sparking a firestorm we haven't seen since the Weimar Republic. Now we arrive at the part of the story that the media refuses to tell you. We leave the boardrooms of Beijing and the oil fields of Saudi Arabia, and we walk right through your front door. Because when the dollar loses its status as the world reserve currency, the consequences do not stay overseas. They come home. For 50 years, the United States has pulled off a magic trick. We printed trillions of dollars and we exported them. We sent our paper to China, to Japan, to Saudi Arabia, and in exchange they sent us flat-screen TVs, cars, and oil. We got the goods, they got the paper. This kept inflation in America artificially low because the extra cash wasn't circulating in Ohio. It was sitting in a vault in Tokyo. But what happens when the world says no more? It is called reverse currency flow. When China, the BRICS nations, and the global south stop using the dollar for trade, they don't just burn those dollars, they dump them. They send them back to the issuer to buy whatever real assets they can get their hands on before the value hits zero. Imagine 50 years of exported inflation washing back onto American shores in a single tidal wave. You are not looking at 8% inflation. You are not looking at 10%. You are staring down the barrel of hyperinflation. We are talking about Weimar Germany levels, Zimbabwe levels. This happens when trillions of expatriated dollars suddenly start chasing the exact same amount of goods and services inside the United States. The velocity of money accelerates to terminal velocity. What does this look like for you? It means your grocery bill doubles every few months. It means a tank of gas costs a day's wages. It means your life savings, that 401k you spent decades building, loses half its purchasing power in a year. The number in your bank account might stay the same, but what it can buy evaporates. You become a millionaire on paper and a pauper in reality. This destroys the middle class. It wipes out the prudent saver. It rewards the reckless and punishes the responsible. And the government? They will try to stop it. But their only tool is a sledgehammer that will crush you even harder. To defend a dying currency, the Federal Reserve has only one option: raise interest rates. We are not talking about a quarter-point hike. To attract foreign buyers for U.S. debt when nobody wants it, the Fed will have to offer massive returns. We are talking about interest rates hitting 15%, maybe 20%. This is the interest rate trap. Right now, your economy is addicted to cheap money. But in this new reality, the withdrawal symptoms are fatal. Think about your mortgage. If rates spike to 15%, the housing market doesn't just cool down, it freezes solid. Nobody can afford to buy. Existing homeowners with variable rate mortgages will see their monthly payments triple overnight. Millions will default. The housing market collapses because the math simply no longer works. Think about your car loan. Think about your credit card debt carrying a 40% APR. Borrowing money becomes prohibitively expensive. And businesses? The zombie companies that have survived for a decade on cheap loans will be wiped out. They can't refinance their debt, they go bankrupt. Layoffs skyrocket, unemployment explodes. So you have the worst of all worlds. Prices are soaring while the economy is crashing. But the deepest cut is the lifestyle shock. We have lived beyond our means for generations. We consume more than we produce. We run massive trade deficits because the world let us. That party is over. When the dollar dies, the days of cheap consumption die with it. No more cheap electronics from Shenzhen. No more fast fashion from Bangladesh. No more fast fashion from Bangladesh. No more inexpensive avocados from Mexico. Everything important becomes insanely expensive. The American standard of living, which was subsidized by the world's willingness to hold our debt, will plummet. We will have to learn to live on what we actually produce, and for a service-based economy that forgot how to manufacture real things, it is a terrifying wake-up call. The government will face an impossible choice. Option A: default on the $35 trillion national debt, admitting bankruptcy and destroying the global financial system instantly. Option B: print more money to pay the debt, accelerating the hyperinflation until the dollar is worth less than the paper it's printed on. History tells us politicians always choose option B. They will print until the end. They will sacrifice the currency to save the state. This is the domestic fallout. It is not a possibility. It is a mathematical certainty once the reverse flow begins. The storm is already making landfall. If you are waiting for the government to fix this, you are waiting to die. The system is broken, and it cannot be fixed. But you can survive it. There is a protocol. A specific set of moves that can shield you from the blast radius. We have diagnosed the disease, now we must prescribe the cure. Predicting the future is a fool's errand, but analyzing the trajectory of current data is intelligence work. Based on the $3 trillion exit signal and the acceleration of BRICS infrastructure, here is the timeline of the collapse as I see it. 2025. The quiet erosion. This is the phase we are in now. You won't see dramatic headlines. You will see more bilateral trade deals that exclude the dollar. You will see central banks continuing to buy gold at record paces. The media will ignore it. The water level will drop slowly in 2026. The tipping point. This is when the dam breaks. I expect China or the BRICS bloc to make their major move, either announcing the convertibility of the yuan to gold or officially launching the BRICS Trade Settlement Unit. The demand for U.S. treasuries will evaporate. The bond market will have its first cardiac arrest. 2027. Crisis mode. The dollar begins a rapid, visible devaluation against real assets. Inflation in the U.S. spikes unpredictably. Capital controls may be introduced to stop you from moving your money out. This is the moment most Americans will realize their savings are in mortal danger. Now, what do? I am not a financial advisor, and I cannot give you personalized advice, but I can tell you what the smart money is doing. I can give you the survival protocol for a post-dollar world. This is not about getting rich. This is about not going to zero. Stake 1, hard assets. Paper is a promise. Gold is a fact. In a debt collapse, you must minimize counterparty risk. That means owning assets that are not someone else's liability. Allocating 20 to 30% of your investable assets into physical gold and silver is no longer extreme. It is prudent. And I mean physical. If you hold a paper ETF, you don't own gold. You own a claim on a vault that might be empty when it matters. If you can't hold it in your hand, you don't own it. Step 2. Real estate with utility. Real estate is a tangible asset, but it is treacherous. The key here is debt structure. If you have a mortgage, it must be a long-term fixed rate. If inflation skyrockets to 20%, your fixed debt is effectively inflated away. The bank pays you to borrow. But avoid variable rates like the plague. Focus on land with utility, farmland, timber, shelter. Property that produces value regardless of the currency symbol next to it. Step 3. Productive industry. Stop gambling on tech unicorns with zero profit. Pivot to companies that produce the essentials of civilization. Energy, mining, agriculture, defense. When the economy collapses, people might cancel their Netflix subscription, but they will not stop heating their homes or eating food. Invest in the companies that make the stuff that hurts when you drop you on your foot. Step 4. The asymmetric hedge. Bitcoin. You don't have to like it, you don't have to understand the code, but you need to understand its function. It is a non-sovereign, censorship-resistant store of value. It is the only digital asset that no central bank can print and no government can freeze. A 5% to 10% allocation is your insurance policy against total fiat failure. But like gold, you must hold the keys. Self-custody is non-negotiable. Step 5, jurisdictional arbitrage. This is the advanced move. Do not keep 100% of your life in the country that is actively debasing your currency. If you have the means, open a bank account in a stable jurisdiction like Singapore or Switzerland. Buy property in a neutral country. Diversify your political risk. If the US government imposes capital controls in 2027, having funds outside the fence could be the difference between freedom and financial captivity. The window to execute these moves is still open, but it is closing by the day. You have the map. You have the timeline. Now let's look at the final, brutal truth about who wins and who loses in this new world order. History is a cruel teacher, and it repeats itself with mathematical precision. We tend to think of empires as eternal, but they are fragile constructs built on faith. Empires do not disappear overnight, but their currencies do. The British pound was the master of the globe for a century. It lost its crown in less than a decade. The US dollar is currently tracing the exact same chart of decline, almost to the day. Do not expect a formal announcement. The end of an era is not televised, it is felt. And do not make the fatal mistake of waiting for a rescue. The politicians who spent the money, the central bankers who printed it, and the financial elites who rigged the system, they aren't coming to save you. They know the math better than anyone. They moved their wealth into hard assets, land and gold, years ago. They are already in the lifeboats while they tell you to stay on the ship. The $3 trillion exodus from China was not an isolated event. It was the warning shot. The silence you hear from the media is not peace, it is the trap. The window to act is closing, and once it shuts, it seals from the outside. The music is about to stop. Do not be the one left holding the bag. Prepare yourself.